This story happened a few years back when I was driving home from my college in Maine to my hometown in Vermont. It was our winter break, and I was going to be home for 2 weeks to enjoy time with family. The drive would usually take me about 8 hours, and I'd leave right after my last class finished for the week. That being said, I ended up driving in some pretty dark and isolated places along the way. My parents would always tell me to break the drive up and stay overnight at a hotel, because they were ultimately afraid I'd fall asleep at the wheel. They still helped me financially, but all the money typically got spent on booze and going out to dinner with friends. So me being irresponsible, I'd try to save the money and make the trip in one night. I was always taught growing up that you should never pick up hitchhikers, but me being a rebellious, naive teenager, I would occasionally give someone a lift. But that all changed on this one particular trip home. It was 10 p.m. and freezing outside. I was making my way down the interstate and I needed to use the restroom. I decided to take the first exit I came across, which led me down this small side street with no houses around. I got out of my car and took care of my business and was back on the road in a matter of minutes. I was just about to be back at the interstate when I saw a person standing on the side of the road, holding what looked like 2 gym bags in their hands. I pulled over and rolled the window down and asked if they needed a ride. For those of you who've never picked up a hitchhiker before, the most awkward part is the first interaction, because you never really know how personal they'll be. The man said he did need a ride and he was only going about 30 minutes down the interstate. He looked like he was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, and he seemed to be trying to catch his breath, as if he had just stopped running. He was wearing all black. I mean everything. Black shoes, black jacket. He even had on black gloves. Which, yes, I'll admit it was sketchy, but it was also wintertime in Maine, so not entirely crazy. I unlocked the door and he got inside with his bags. It took us about 5 minutes to finally make it back to the interstate. Again, I've picked up hitchhikers before, and for the most part, everyone's been really cool. A lot of times you'll hear some pretty crazy stories, because it's not like you'll see each other again anyways. But this guy was completely quiet. I noticed that there was a damp, putrid smell that had filled my car right when he got in. It smelled like something metallic or maybe iron. Was it him or his bags? I thought to myself. My eyes immediately went down to the guy's bags. They were dark, wet, and stained. And when I asked what he was up to this evening before I picked him up, he just answered that he was out there fishing. He further explained that he ended up catching a lot of fish that evening and stayed out later than he planned, as he gestured to both of his bags as he lifted up his hands. I nervously laughed and tried to hide my concern, because I noticed the guy didn't have a fishing pole with him, which cued me that something wasn't right here. I asked him what he was fishing for. Not that I knew anything about fishing, but still I wanted to know. But this is when it got uncomfortable. The guy sat there as if he didn't hear me. I'm sitting less than 3 feet away from him. Of course he heard me. I asked him again, so what all did you catch? This time he turned his head towards me and began to smile. In a creepy, mostly psychotic tone, he said we should pull over at this bridge up here and fish together. Last time I fished here, I did extremely well. I very awkwardly laughed and told him I couldn't, and that I had to keep driving. But his only response was pull the car over now and let's go fishing. It won't take more than 5 minutes. I ended up stopping my car on top of the next small bridge we came across. I put the car in park and left the engine running. "Get out," he ordered me. Following his command, I did as he said. Luckily, before I went to college, my parents had gotten me a small can of pepper spray to keep in my car. I kept it in my driver's side door panel, so I was able to discreetly retrieve it as I got out of my car. Keeping the pepper spray concealed, I slowly walked around my vehicle. Out of nowhere, the guy yelled at me, "Come here, bitch." As he lunged forward, I jumped back and threw up my hand with the spray and aimed it directly in his face. The guy screamed and went to the ground as his hands began rubbing his eyes. I ran around the vehicle and jumped back in the driver's seat, shifted the car into drive, and sped off. It took me about 10 minutes of driving before I finally gained cell service back and notified the police. The cops went to the area and never found the man or those bags he was carrying. Till this day, it still kills me not to know what was in those bags that smelled so bad. I obviously no longer pick up hitchhikers and will forever be haunted by this incident. Y'all be careful on these roads. This happened to me when I was 16 years old. I had just left a friend's house after a late-night meeting over a school project. I was driving down Clinton Road near West Milford, New Jersey. I had made this drive a few times and was already used to it by now. I stayed out later than expected and it was around midnight. Clinton Road was pretty isolated, and it was a rarity to pass any other cars driving it. On my drive home that night, as I approached an old bridge, my headlights revealed something ahead of me. A small figure standing in the middle of the road. A child. His arms outstretched as if calling for help. My heart skipped a beat as I gradually came to a halt. My gaze riveted on the small boy standing in the middle of the road in front of me. At first, I didn't know what to think. The boy was probably 10 years old, and there's absolutely no reason for a kid this young to be by themselves, especially in a place like this. But as I looked closer, I realized my mistake. The boy was pale, soaking wet and translucent in my headlights' beams. I couldn't see his face clearly, but what terrified me the most was the way he swayed back and forth. Fear crippled me as I stared at the figure and thought about what it might be. I've never believed in ghosts, but there was something not right about this kid. He had an unusual appearance about him that I couldn't explain. I rolled down my window and called out to him. "Hey buddy, you okay?" No response. I slowly drove my vehicle towards the young boy, and in an instant he vanished. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck begin to stand on end. I went home that evening and was completely freaked out. I ended up mentioning to my buddy what I had seen that night, and he told me that many years ago a kid drowned near that bridge, and legend says that he haunts the area to this very day. At the time, I had no clue this was a thing. For a bridge that I've drove across almost every day to be haunted, and for the first time to ever have an encounter like this, it's made me second guess my outlook on the paranormal. I was 19 years old at the time, driving home from my girlfriend's house in Mansfield, Ohio. It was around 2 in the morning, and I found myself stopped at a red light on the outskirts of town. Behind me, the faint glow of the city lights offered a bit of comfort, but ahead lay nothing but darkness. Vast fields of corn and dense shelter belts. As I sat there waiting for the light to change, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I figured it was probably just a deer, common in these parts. But when I turned to look, my heart skipped a beat. There, creeping towards my car, was a man. He looked to be in his 50s, his figure looming ominously in the moonlight. But what really got me was the tire iron he was clutching in his hand. Fear surged through me as I realized the danger I was in. Without a moment's hesitation, I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, running the red light without looking back, leaving the man and his tire iron behind in the darkness. I kept driving. The image of him clutching the tire iron burned into my mind. My eyes flickered from the road to my car's gas gauge, which showed empty. It dawned on me. I had forgotten to fill up back in town after leaving my girlfriend's house. Gas stations out here were hit or miss. The few we did have would typically close down before midnight. It was common in our small community, and once those pumps shut down, there was no filling up until the next day. With a decent drive ahead of me, including my return trip for work the next day in town, I had no choice but to stop now. The next gas station just so happened to be a half-mile up ahead. I pulled into the vacant parking lot, shut the car off, and got out. The old dim parking lot lights buzzed and flickered, casting shadows across the deserted area. The small single gas pump with its outdated analog rolling numbers clicked softly as I pumped the gas. With every click, my nerves seemed to rattle even more. I stood there pumping gas for about 5 minutes, when out of nowhere a loud bang drew my attention. The sound echoed from the area near the dumpster on the opposite side of the parking lot. I stood there in silence, trying to convince myself that it was just probably an animal rummaging through the dumpster for food. But then, the bang occurred again, this time followed by a man's deranged laughter. The banging sound took on a rhythmic pattern as the man's laughter grew louder and louder. I couldn't see the man, but I knew he was there, lurking in the shadows just beyond my line of sight. Fear gripped me as I realized that I wasn't alone in the darkness, and whatever this man was doing, it was anything but normal. I shut off the gas pump and dropped the hose, letting it fall to the ground. My hands fumbled around in my pockets, searching desperately for my keys. But all the while, the man's laughter grew even louder and more menacing. I got in my car and turned it on, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I sped out of the parking lot. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the dumpster as I zoomed past it, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever or whoever was making those noises. I'll never fully understand what happened that night, but since then, I've made it a point to avoid staying out so late on those roads. Thanks for tuning into the channel. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And make sure you hit the bell notification to be alerted whenever I post a video. Let me know in the comments section what you think about today's stories. And until next time, stay sinister.